Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. And today we're going deep on something that affects us all every single day.
Oh, yeah, every day.
Money, right?
Every day.
But most of us kind of
Yeah.
have no idea how it really works.
Right.
So we're going to be looking at how money is created, the role of banks, and what kind of power the Federal Reserve really has.
Yeah, and you know what's so cool about this deep dive
Mhm.
is that we're starting with like this real life legal case, right? Yeah. We have a homeowner and they're facing foreclosure.
Okay.
But get this, their defense is totally wild.
Okay.
They're basically critiquing the entire banking system.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not starting with some,
Yeah.
boring textbook.
But not a textbook.
It is a
It's a legal document.
Yeah.
It's called an amicus curiae brief. You ever heard of
I
that?
have heard of that. I don't really know what it means, though.
So basically, it's like someone with some expertise coming in to like
Yeah.
help the court outright.
Gotcha.
Like a friend of the court kind of thing.
Yeah.
So in this case, it's this economist, Michael Paoletta,
Okay.
and he's arguing that the way that banks create money is like fundamentally flawed and maybe even illegal.
Okay, now you've got my attention because I think, most of us just kind of assume that banks lend out the money that people deposit.
Right, exactly.
So where is this, creation idea coming from?
Yeah, well, so Paoletta, he makes this really, really important distinction between a money of account
Okay.
and money of exchange.
Okay.
So money of account is like those numbers that you see in your bank account.
Uh-huh.
It's basically credit, right?
Okay.
But money of exchange is the actual like physical cash we use.
I gotcha. So, when I deposit a check,
Yes.
my account balance goes up.
Right.
But that doesn't mean the bank had that exact cash, sitting in a vault somewhere.
Exactly.
Right.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The brief dives deep into this idea of fractional reserve banking,
Okay.
which is how our system works.
Yeah.
So they only need to hold a fraction of those deposits in reserve, and then they can lend out the rest. But here's the really interesting part.
Okay.
When they make those loans,
Yeah.
they're essentially creating new money.
Hold on, creating money. How is that even legal?
Well, that's the big question, right? And the brief cites a lot of legal precedents in different sources,
Right.
like even a court case from 1969,
Wow.
where a bank was actually found to be acting ultra vires,
Ultra vires.
which basically means beyond their legal authority
Okay.
by lending credit.
Huh.
So the implication there is they can't lend what they don't have,
Right.
and credit isn't theirs to lend.
Okay, so they can't lend out existing funds.
Right.
They can't lend out credit.
Yeah.
How are they making loans then?
Well, that's the whole core argument that Powell is making in this brief.
Okay.
Banks are creating new money when they make loans, and they're basing it on a borrower's promise to repay.
Hmm.
And he cites some interesting sources like Congressman Wright Patman's book called A Primer on Money
Okay.
from back in 1964 to back this up.
Wow. And to think, I thought I understood how my checking account worked.
I know it's crazy, right?
This is kind of blowing my mind a little
Yeah.
bit, but I am very intrigued.
It gets even more interesting when
Yeah.
you start thinking about what this means for inflation.
Yeah, because if banks are constantly creating new money, it's like diluting the
Exactly.
value of the money that's already out there.
Exactly. It's like
Right.
more money,
Yeah,
chasing the same amount of stuff, so prices go up.
exactly. Okay, so more money chasing the same amount of goods and services equals higher prices.
Right.
But what does the Federal Reserve have to do with all this?
Yeah, so Paoletta's brief argues that the Federal Reserve plays this really key role in controlling the money supply, but it doesn't necessarily work in everyone's favor. To illustrate this point, he uses this really interesting analogy
Okay.
about a cattle rancher.
Okay, I do love a good analogy.
Yeah, so imagine
Lay it on me.
a wealthy rancher who controls the only water source for this whole valley full of farmers. He can choose to release plenty of water, right? Helping the farmers thrive.
Right.
Or he can restrict it,
Yeah.
leading to hardship
Right.
and maybe even force them to sell their land.
Oh, man. Okay, I'm already seeing the parallel here.
Yeah.
This rancher has a lot of power over these farmers because he controls this vital resource.
Exactly. And that's kind of how Paoletta views the Federal Reserve's control over the money supply.
Okay.
They can choose to expand the money supply,
Yeah.
leading to these economic booms, or they can contract it,
Yeah.
potentially triggering recessions.
So is he basically arguing that the Federal Reserve has too much power and that this power can be used to manipulate the economy
Yeah.
for, the benefit of just a few?
Yeah, it's definitely a recurring theme in this brief. And he brings up these historical figures like Congressman James Jackson,
Okay.
who warned about the dangers of a centralized banking system, all the way back in 1790.
Wow.
And then you have Senator Robert Owen, who was actually instrumental in creating the Federal Reserve, but later on he became disillusioned with how it was being manipulated.
So this concern about centralized banking and its potential for abuse
Yeah.
is nothing new.
Not at all.
Oh,
Paoletta's brief suggests that this pattern of a small group controlling the money supply for their own gain at the expense of the majority
right.
has been playing out for centuries.
This is getting intense. So if the current system is so flawed, what does he propose as an alternative? Does he want to just get rid of the Federal Reserve altogether?
Well, he does present an alternative in the brief.
Right.
It's the use of United States notes as a form of currency.
Okay.
And these notes would be issued directly by the government, not based on debt,
Okay.
and potentially solve some of the problems that he's highlighting.
Interesting. So how would that actually work? Does he give any real-world examples of this kind of system?
He uses this like simplified story about an island
Okay.
to illustrate how fractional reserve banking like we have now can trap people in debt and lead to economic control.
Okay, I'm definitely hooked. I want to hear about this island story. All right, so let's hear about this island. How does their economy work? I'm guessing it's not all sunshine and coconut cocktails.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not a tropical paradise in this story.
Ah.
So picture this island, right? And the people there, they initially just trade goods and services through bartering.
Okay, so like very old school?
Yeah, very old school. But then somebody comes along and sets up a bank
Okay.
and introduces a currency. Let's just call it island dollars for simplicity.
Makes sense. It's got to be easier than hauling around goats and chickens all the time, right?
Right, exactly. But here's the catch. This bank uses a fractional reserve system, just like we talked about.
Ah, so they're creating money out of thin air, just like the banks Paoletta was describing.
Exactly. And as they start making more and more loans, the people on this island find themselves increasingly in debt to the bank.
Oh, no.
And that debt, plus the interest they have to pay, starts to give the bank a whole lot of control over the island's economy.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
No, not really. And it really highlights this idea of how a simple act of creating a bank and a currency
Yeah.
can have some pretty serious consequences.
Especially when it's tied to debt.
Right.
Wow, this island story is a powerful way to show how this all works.
It is. It's pretty simple, but it gets the point across.
Yeah. Okay, so let's bring this back to us.
Okay.
What does this mean for us? Why should we care about all these complex ideas about money creation and the role of the Federal Reserve?
Well, I mean, that's the big question, right? And this deep dive is really all about giving you the tools to understand how the system works so you can make informed decisions for yourself.
Yeah, I get that knowledge is power, but what are some concrete actions people can take? We've all felt the sting of inflation.
Yeah.
Seen prices going up, maybe felt a little bit helpless about it.
Right. Well, I think it starts with financial literacy.
Okay.
The more you understand about how money actually works, the better you'll be at managing your own finances. And the brief actually talks about that. It mentions how important it is to understand contracts, to really be wary of debt, and to know your rights.
So read the fine print, basically.
Exactly. Always read the fine print so you know what you're getting into.
Okay, so that's a good starting point. What about these alternative financial models we talked about earlier? Can those play a role?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. There are definitely options beyond like the traditional banking system.
Yeah.
Maybe you explore local credit unions,
Okay.
which are owned by their members and usually have like a more community-focused approach.
Yeah, I've heard good things about credit unions.
Yeah, they're a good option. And there are other things to consider too, like supporting initiatives in your community that are promoting financial well-being,
Okay.
or even looking into decentralized currencies like Bitcoin,
Oh, yeah.
which operate completely outside of that traditional banking system.
Interesting. So it's really about finding what aligns with your own values and goals.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about finding what works best for you.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about. We've covered so much.
Yeah, we have.
From that legal brief to the entire foundation of our financial system. It's crazy.
It's all connected.
What stands out to you as the most important message for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that we don't have to just be passive bystanders in this system.
Right.
The brief really drives home this idea that understanding how it all works gives us more power to make informed decisions.
It's a reminder that we don't just have to accept the way things are. We can ask questions and explore those alternatives and really work towards a financial system that benefits everyone.
Exactly, and I think that's a really important message.
So we went from this legal brief defending a homeowner
Yeah,
to like questioning the entire system.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Pretty amazing how these ideas can connect like that.
It is, but before we get too carried away, let's
Yeah.
get back to some of the solutions that Paolella is proposing.
Right. So the On the Island story, which shows us the problems with fractional reserve banking, Paoletta is advocating for the use of United States notes as an alternative form of currency.
Right, we touched on this earlier, but can you remind us how that would work?
Sure. So unlike the Federal Reserve notes that we use now,
Yeah,
which are essentially IOUs backed by the government's promise to pay,
right.
United States notes wouldn't be based on debt at all.
Okay.
They would be issued directly by the government, cutting out the banks as the middleman.
So the government and not the banks would be controlling the money supply.
Exactly. And that's a pretty big shift from how things are done now.
Yeah. What are the supposed benefits of that?
Well, the brief suggests that this could give the government more direct control over the economy so they could manage things like inflation more effectively
Okay.
and potentially fund public projects without having to take on more debt.
That sounds like a pretty radical change.
It is a big change for sure, but it's not a completely new idea.
Really?
Yeah, United States notes, also known as greenbacks, were actually used during the Civil War.
Wow, so we've actually had a system like that before in the U.S.
We have, and it's a really interesting example of how our monetary system has evolved over time.
It is fascinating. Okay, but wouldn't giving the government that much control over the money supply be risky? Like, couldn't that lead to them abusing their power?
It's a totally valid concern, and the brief does acknowledge that any system can be abused, right? But the argument is that a system based on United States notes
Yeah.
could be designed in a way that has checks and balances to prevent the government from having too much control
Okay.
or manipulating the currency for their own gain.
It seems like there are a lot of different perspectives on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what makes this topic so interesting. There's no easy answer.
Right.
There are good arguments to be made on all sides.
Okay, so we talked about the problems with the current system. We've explored some alternatives.
Yeah.
But what about, like, us, the average people, just trying to get by in this crazy world? What can we do?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, so where do we go from here, right? We've gone pretty deep on this stuff.
Yeah.
Money creation, the power of the Federal Reserve, even some alternative ideas, like those United States notes. But, like, what does it all mean for us? For everyday people just trying to, like, live their lives?
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways from this whole deep dive and from Paoletta's brief is that we don't have to just be passive in all of this.
Right.
We can actually understand these systems and then use that knowledge to make better decisions.
I get that knowledge is power, but what kind of actions can people actually take? We've all seen prices go up, felt that inflation pinch.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe felt a little helpless.
Well, it starts with, being more financially literate,
Okay.
right? Like the more you actually understand about how money works, the better you're going to be at managing your own money.
So basically, educate yourself.
Exactly. Educate yourself. And the brief actually talks about this. It mentions understanding contracts,
Okay.
being cautious about taking on too much debt,
Yeah.
and knowing your rights.
So read the fine print, basically.
Always read the fine print. Know what you're getting into.
Okay, good advice. What about those alternative financial models we talked about before?
Yeah.
Can those actually help?
For sure. Those are worth exploring, too. Maybe look into joining a local credit union.
Okay.
They're owned by the members, and they often have like a more community-minded approach,
Yeah.
which can be a good thing.
That makes sense. Are there other alternatives worth checking out?
Absolutely. You could look into supporting, local initiatives in your community that are trying to promote financial well-being, or even explore things like decentralized currencies,
Like Bitcoin.
like Bitcoin. And it's like things that operate outside of that traditional banking system.
That's interesting. So really it's about finding what works for you and what aligns with your values.
Exactly. There's no one right answer. It's about finding what you feel good about.
This deep dive has definitely been a wild ride.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we started with this legal brief trying to help a homeowner.
Right.
Now we're questioning the entire financial system. It's pretty crazy.
I know, right? But that's what I love about these deep dives. It's amazing how these ideas connect.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what do you think is like the most important message for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that money isn't just this neutral force in the background.
Right.
It's a system, a tool, and it can be shaped to benefit different groups of people. So the more we understand about how it works,
Yeah.
the more we can actually do something about it.
It's like a reminder that we don't just have to accept the way things are. We can
Yeah.
ask those tough questions.
Yeah.
Look for alternatives and try to build a system that works for everyone, not just the select few.
Exactly. That's what it's all about.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of money and banking. I know we covered some really complex ideas,
Yeah, we did.
but hopefully you're walking away with a better understanding of how it all works and what you can actually do to make it work for you.
That's the goal.
We started with this amicus curiae brief by Michael Paoletta, a legal document that challenged the way we think about how money is created and the role of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating document.
We explored that crucial difference between money of account and money of exchange.
Yeah.
And we even grappled with that idea that banks don't just lend money, they actually create it.
It's a mind-blowing concept.
We heard from voices from the past, like Congressman James Jackson and Senator Robert Owen, who had some concerns about centralized banking.
Yeah, and their concerns are still relevant today.
It's crazy how some things never change. We even visited that fictional island to see how fractional reserve banking can lead to a cycle of debt.
It's a powerful illustration.
But it wasn't all doom and gloom, right? We talked about alternatives like using United States notes, and we discussed things that we can do as individuals to become more financially savvy.
Like educating ourselves, reading the fine print.
Exactly, and exploring those alternatives.
Right, taking control of our own financial well-being.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, hit me.
What if we stopped thinking of money just as a measure of value and started thinking of it as a tool for positive social change?
That is a good question.
How could we create a system that actually prioritizes things like well-being, sustainability, and shared prosperity?
Yeah, what would that system look like?
It's a question worth thinking about as we navigate this complex and ever-changing world of money and finance.
It is. It's a big question, but it's one we need to be asking.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.